Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing Netflix's heist film Triple Frontier. Now Triple Frontier follows a group of army veterans, retired veterans, who essentially attempt to pull off a major heist to rob millions from a drug cartel. To improve their family lives. Essentially, they're retired, but upon retiring from the army, life didn't particularly turn out as well as they had hoped. The movie itself doesn't rely too much on PTSD as a crutch to carry the film along. It does touch on how unraveled their lives are as a result, but it tends to stand on its own, and that much I do appreciate about the film. Now, over the past few years, we've had a number of heist films, right, between the Italian Job and the Ocean's films, all of which were great films. But the one thing that they all had in common is that at the end of these films, usually the protagonist or the group, they do benefit in some way, or there's a happy ending, or they're incredibly wealthy, right? So picture those heist films with Triple Frontier, except everything imaginable that could go wrong actually does go wrong, and you'll actually have Triple Frontier. Now, the director of the film, Jesse Chandler, or Chandler, I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong. I don't know much about the director. In recent memory, the only thing I can recall is A Most Violent Year, which I believe he directed or maybe produced. If I am wrong and he just produced, then this would in fact be the first film of his that I'm actually exposed to, and I have to say, yeah, well deserved. Round of applause. He did an excellent job here, and before going any further, I must say, from this point onwards, I will forever remember these, or envision these characters as the Dark Knight, Green Arrow, and Two-Face. Now, the other two characters, I'm not quite sure where they would fit in. I'm sure they could play some other DC or Marvel characters, but not important. Right? These three characters, for me personally, actually made the film. Now, Triple Frontier starts out following one of our protagonists, who is aptly named Pope, and the irony is not lost on us by the end of the film. Who he propositions four of his brothers with whom he served time with in the army, and advises them that, okay, hey, I have this recon mission that will pay very well and will essentially solve a lot of the problems that you're having, because a lot of these guys left the army feeling that they've lost something, right? Or the years that they dedicated, or it felt stolen, because you went to the army and Ben Affleck's character, who they call Red Eye, it seems he was their captain when they served, and you understand why I call him or reference Batman to him, not just because yes, Ben Affleck did play the Dark Knight in the DCEU, but his character in the film itself, he acted as the tactician, and at a moment's notice he could, and one of the characters actually says in the movie, is that you can't help it. With very little information, he could deduce how many resources they would need to pull off a mission. He would tell them essentially strategic locations where they need to go, how long the mission will take, what they will need to complete the mission, and he's essentially the tactician of the group, and that's it. That's how I always imagined. Well, we all know Batman is a tactician by nature, which is why, yeah, there's always this this notion that with enough prep time, Batman could essentially defeat anyone. So yeah, for me throughout the film, that I could not see. I don't know if this was a situation where the director chose to give a nod or something to that effect throughout the film, or whether Ben Affleck had a hand in writing some of the lines for his character, but it essentially played off as the detective himself, the Dark Knight, right? But he himself, his character, I mean, having come back, said that he felt as though 20 years was stolen from him, because he spent all that time in the army, and you're honing these skills essentially to be a killer, right? You're honing these skills, and then you're told to head back home. Once you're back home, what do you do with it, right? Um, at that point, you're no longer everything that you've seen, everything you've done. You're no longer a normal member of society, and with the skills that you've obtained, I don't imagine that you would. What jobs would you do? How do you talk to people normally? How do you interact normally? Right? These aren't your brothers that you'll be dealing with who would perhaps understand what you've been through, and you can talk war stories with them and stuff like that. Right? So his marriage fell apart. He has his daughters to take care of, and that's not his priority. But he finds himself essentially selling condos, and he's just that's not him. But he has to do something to get by. So in their own way, each of these characters have lost something. Their lives were impacted in some way by what they saw, what they've had to do in the army. And as I mentioned before, the movie doesn't attempt to use that as a crutch to hold your hand through the film. It is touched on, but then it makes it touches on it, and then from there it picks up and it focuses on the characters themselves in their element, and you truly see what they're capable of. Now, aside from PTSD, the film does touch on a number of other recurring themes. The one that stuck out to me the most being more or less a discussion of whether or not what the reward for doing good should be. Should it be something tangible, or is it that by virtue of doing good, that good deed should be reward enough? And a number of the characters felt as though they were robbed of years of their life, and they weren't rewarded enough for it. Coming from retiring from the army, they were all each impacted in their own way, as I've said. And Pope, knowing this, approached them with that in mind, that okay, hey, we can do this one job, and this will take care of you. This will take care of you guys financially, and could potentially set you up for to earn even more, and you guys will be set for life. Now, on executing the recon mission, and it was at this point that he revealed to them that, hey, what I said before, it was not entirely true, or he only told them half the truth. And in fact, his story about having an agreement with the local militia to perform an operation to take down the kingpin was in fact not true, and he himself had hoped to do it with their assistance. Now, obviously, each of these characters, Fish himself having, he indicated that he has a baby either on the way. I believe he has a kid on the way, and so he has a lot to lose. Each of them in their own way has a lot to lose, and Red Eye more so than the others, because he has two kids. To be honest, they mentioned that he was their captain, but that aside, he seemed to have a lot more to lose than the others did. Ironhead didn't particularly. He was just there. He worked giving motivational speeches and stuff, and his life wasn't terrible per se. He cared most about his brother Ben and his well-being, and Ben was fighting in underground clubs in order to make money. So their life wasn't great, but they weren't in a horrible situation. Red Eye himself was on the verge of his pension couldn't cover all his bills. He has two kids to take care of. His wife divorced him. And I believe on the face of it, each of them actually, they agreed to Pope's at the time ridiculous plan, because they wanted to feel alive again, and it's to be able to put some of those skills that they learned, the training that they'd done, to use. And so they all agreed, hey, let's plan this out carefully. And I mentioned Ben Affleck being the tactician before, the Dark Knight character. he essentially told them, and this is what we will need. This is how long it will take. Pope did some research ahead of time to know when the kingpin, essentially Loria, was going to be the most vulnerable, when his children were actually at church. Ironically enough, a kingpin with a godly soul, but yeah, and so they decided this would be the perfect opportunity. Going on a Sunday, Loria will be the only one there because he doesn't like to leave his money alone. So someone's always there, and because he doesn't want anything to happen to his kids, most of his guards are usually with them when they're on their way to church. And so the operation begins. They storm the house, and eventually they found it. The money being at the location, but hidden just beyond the walls of the house. And they eventually, a sigh of relief, they found the money. It turned out to be a significantly larger sum than they actually initially thought it would be. And they managed to, things were going almost too perfectly, and they managed to get the cash. Ironhead did get injured somewhere through, but it was nothing serious. They managed to kill Loria just as they were leaving, and they left, and I was like, yeah, this is the moment. This is the moment where things go extremely well, and they leave and live happily ever after, and their families are set for life. And then I looked at the timer and I realized, no, we're not even halfway through the film yet. So it's just downhill from here, right? And so they left the house, jumped into the van to head to the meeting place where they had arranged for a helicopter to pick them up. The team, of course, been a bit uneasy because of what transpired back at the Kingpin's house, where Red Eye himself, he saw money, and he was like, "Hey, this is what I've wanted," and they tried to scrape together every single dime that was there, even though they didn't have the space to put that much cash in the first place, and that was not the plan, right? And you see later on that eventually becomes their downfall, the money itself. And they get to the area where they're to the rendezvous area where they're to meet this guy that's supposed to take a plane, and then they're supposed to take the plane to a different location, and from there they're supposed to take a boat and they'll be scot-free. Of course, did not go that way. So they get to the rendezvous point. Ironhead's friend who brought in the helicopter did as he promised. He brought it, took his money, he left, and then things started to go terribly wrong. So they pack all this money, despite going over the weight capacity for the chopper itself. Because they would have to fly over the mountains in order to get to open sea to get to the location that they need to get to, and the plane would not be able to go a high enough altitude with the weight that they were carrying, because it was a lot of money. I believe it was about $250 million, right? And so they had some on the outside and some packed inside of the aircraft, and they realized that, hey, well, the closer they got to the mountains, and they made an attempt to actually make the climb, only to realize that they were already at the limit and they could not make it. They pushed out $50 million, and I wanted to cry, because that's $50 million. But I don't know, for the most part, there were a lot of moments in the movie where I was wondering why, because I do felt as though they could have hidden this money at a different location and then come back for it later, rather than trying to take it all in one go. But I can sort of understand having needed this kind of cash, and then an opportunity suddenly presents itself to you. the need, the greed, it was very much real in the moment, and it happened to them, and so they pushed out $50 million and then still attempted to make the climb, and with the remainder, which was still too heavy. But I mean, even if you left the rest and kept $100 million would still be a lot of money, and again, come back for the rest. But I suppose in hindsight now, it may have been a bit dangerous for them to go back in that territory, given that these guys would be looking for them even after killing Gloria, the kingpin. Their confidant told them, "Hey, this is not just his money. This money belongs to a lot of people, right?" So they attempted to make the climb, and of course, it was the aircraft was still too heavy. The plane stalled. The helicopter stalled. They started to descend, and they had to crash land. And lo and behold, they ended up in a what appeared to be a drug field, where there are a number of farmers who were working for the cartels to make cocaine. And so these guys obviously were heavily armed. Tensions rise, and eventually someone fired at someone. In a situation like that, it was bound to happen. But of course, the men felt as though, hey, we could have done things a bit differently. And it was at this point that I tended to disagree with them the most. Oddly enough, it's at that point where they felt like they should do less and not more. I mean, part of that, it was, yeah, listen, when they're at the house and they've seen all the money, hey, the money is here, we're going to take the money, we need to go, we need to take care of this now, we need to hunt. But, I mean, as they got further and further away, it's as though it dawned on them that, hey, it's just money, right? And I mean, they ended up in a shootout at the farm there. They killed a number of people there. Some who may have been innocent, some, in my opinion, not very much, because if you're working there, odds are you've done some shitty things, and whether directly or indirectly. And so they pay the village head or the guy in charge there some money and say, hey, we're sorry, things didn't go the way it was supposed to go. Here, take this money. Are we square? Yeah, the guy says yes, and they left. But of course, with no aircraft to take them, they were behind on their schedule to meet the next transportation, and by the time they had to traverse these terrains, and for a portion of it, they kept losing money as they went along. A horse fell off the path here, and they had to lose cash. And I mean, they were cold. Ben initially just started to burn some of the cash just to keep warm, right? And of course, someone from the village who's I'm assuming, I think a relative of his got killed in the fight before, and he kept tracking them for revenge, and killed Red Eye. It was a sad moment for me. So he killed Red Eye, and of course they start blaming each other, and they start quarreling and fighting among themselves. I wouldn't say either of them were to blame. I mean, Red Eye initially, if they had taken less money, the money that they had planned to take, they would have been able to climb climb the mountains, and they would have been home, right? So everyone somewhere along the way made some decision that inevitably led to their downfall. So Red Eye died, and they were left wondering at that point, and it was a good. I liked what the director did here, because, and I don't know if Triple Frontier was based on a novel or not, but I mean, the themes that played throughout were beautifully done, and they at that moment had to decide what to carry, because they needed to meet the boat to get home, but they had all this money, but they didn't have an easy way to transport it, and they now had their friend's body. So which do we carry? They're not one man short, right? And they decided we're not leaving. We're not leaving him. Rightfully so. They're not leaving him. So I mean, they sent Ben ahead to the location where they're supposed to meet the boat, and he comes back and says everything's okay. He gave the guy half the money there to pay him, and he said he'd wait, and so they can head there now. But of course, by the time they get there, they've discovered that whatever remnants of the cartel was remaining, essentially put out a contract for them, and this included not just adults but teenagers who were about in the village, forcing them to work for them, right? And of course they didn't feel, our group didn't feel too comfortable about shooting kids. I mean, some of them were, and I would not be upset. I was not upset with him, because at this point in time it was life or death, right? And so they got there. They got to the meeting point, only to realize that the guy who was holding the boat sold them out, right? And they had to fight their way out. Now, by the time they left the mountain, they had to essentially discard the rest of the 200 million that they had left, and they only had with them in their knapsacks and bags, which eventually amounted to about 5 million. By the time they left, they got onto the boat and got back to a secure location where they could then head back home. And they met up with I don't know, it's an accountant of some sort, who I believe she's possibly going to launder the money for them, right? And she took her fee, and she explained to them that, hey, and 5 million is all that remains, and they had the option of keeping the money or donating it to Ben's family. And the moment here is where they all had to make that final decision, right? What was most important? And in that moment, they all made the decision to give that money to Red Eye's family, which was a heartfelt moment. We could tell from the beginning that they were all very close, and I'm glad that by the end of the film, none had betrayed the other. They all made stupid mistakes, made bad decisions, but they all agreed at some point that, hey, this wasn't your fault. This was our decision. So we're all responsible for it, and they all took responsibility for it, right? And one man fell down, and they saw to it to ensure that his family was in fact taken care of. So they had 250 million, but by the end of the film, they had what they started out with, which was essentially nothing, right? And it comes back to the recurring themes in the film, being another of which being brotherhood and camaraderie, and they started out with that and they ended with that. And so there you have it. I will not give the film a rating per se. I'll just say that I thoroughly enjoyed it from beginning to end. I do feel as though in some way or another it could have been a smidge shorter, right? It ran on just a bit longer, but even with that, I did feel engaged all the way throughout, and I could relate to maybe one or two of the characters. I do believe you'll see something of yourself in any one of these characters, whether you're dealing with not necessarily a drug issue, but I mean, even if you have kids, going through a divorce, whatever the case might be, there's something relatable there, and it felt real in that way, right? I know Steven Spielberg. It did not feel like a TV movie. It was well shot, well written, well directed, and so I did thoroughly enjoy the film. So be sure to post down in the comments. Let us know whether or not you enjoyed the film. Would you like to see a sequel? I'm actually for having standalone films. Not every film I believe deserves having sequel. I felt like this story was told. There was a satisfying conclusion, And I mean, there are possibilities we could explore in terms of what these characters did after the events, or even before, if to go down the prequel angle. But I do believe that it told the story that it needed to tell, and there would be no need for that. It's a film that stands on its own, and very well, I might add. So be sure to post down in the comments what your thoughts are. If you like the content you see here and you'd like to see more, be sure to hit like or subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.